Hi everybody. Welcome to my talk from Spyder to Sackboy, a big adventure in interactive music. My name's Winifred Phillips, and I'm a game composer. Some of my projects include games from the franchises God of War, Assassin's Creed, Total War, Little Big Planet, and The Sims. I've written about all of this in my book, A Composer's Guide to Game Music, published by the MIT Press, and in the feature articles that I've written for Gamma Sutra. Back in the summer of 2019, I started working with Sumo Sheffield on music for two very different games. It was pretty intense work over the course of many months on two projects with very different musical needs, and I spent a lot of time ping-ponging back and forth between them. After they both hit retail in 2020, I realized how eye-opening an experience that had been. Both games required complex musical interactivity, but each met that goal in very different ways. Today we're going to be taking a look at those two projects, Sackboy: A Big Adventure for the PlayStation 5 and Spyder for Apple Arcade. Both projects use some common dynamic implementation models. Over the course of this talk, we'll discuss how each project incorporated these implementation strategies: pure horizontal resequencing, pure vertical layering, a hybrid horizontal-vertical system, and a hybrid linear dynamic structure. As we know, dynamic music differs from linear music in some fundamental ways. Linear music is a single contiguous unit, like a straight line moving in one direction with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. But dynamic music is more like a maze that can move in many directions, with lots of divergent possibilities. The art of interactive music creation and implementation is not just about understanding and deploying interactive music systems, such as the ones on this list. It's also about looking at the nuts and bolts of these systems and seeing all of those divergent possibilities. Sackboy: A Big Adventure and Spyder both did a great job in taking dynamic music implementation techniques and expanding on them in creative ways, so let's explore that. But before we jump in, I'd first like to introduce you to our two heroes. Of course, everyone is well acquainted with that international superstar, Sackboy. His daring escapades in Craft World have become the stuff of legend. Sackboy's latest big adventure is a smash-hit action game that pits him against the evil Vex, who's bent on destroying Craft World with his terrible topsy-turvy machine. Of course, Sackboy must act fast to save the day, so let's watch him in action. While Sackboy is a legend, many of you may not have heard of our other hero, that amazing covert operative, that groovy agent of mystery, that globe-trotting defender of truth and freedom, Agent 8. It's understandable to overlook him. He is less than an inch tall. The Spyder game is an Apple Arcade exclusive in which Agent 8 undertakes stealthy spy missions to save the world many times over, though the British spy agency would disavow any knowledge of his actions should he be captured or stepped on. So let's see Agent 8 in action. Working on music for these two projects at the same time was an intense and rewarding experience. For Sackboy: A Big Adventure, I joined a diverse music team and was assigned the task of composing music for Sackboy's underwater escapades. I was also one of the team members responsible for creating cover music that would fit into Sackboy's world. For Spyder, I was the sole composer, creating original 1960s and 70s inspired music for Agent 8's sneaky spy missions. Both games were developed by Sumo Sheffield, and both included ambitious music systems using similar dynamic strategies. There are a lot of interesting differences, though, and that will be the subject of our talk today. Coming back to our list of implementation procedures, let's start with pure horizontal resequencing. Both games used this technique, so we'll now focus on the most straightforward example. Like the rest of the games in the franchise, Sackboy: A Big Adventure is a celebration of music, incorporating original compositions, licensed pop tunes, and cover tracks. Along with the original music tracks I composed for Sackboy: Big Adventure, the team also asked me to compose a cover song that would fit into Sackboy's world, a brand new version of Material Girl. My version reimagined Material Girl as a classical orchestral composition while also retaining enough elements to make sure it was recognizable. The final mix was separated into segments for implementation. Now this is where horizontal resequencing comes in. When we compose music in segments that can be triggered in different orders, that's horizontal resequencing. Shuffling things around makes the music more responsive to the game, and also it helps the music to feel a little bit less repetitive. Material Girl is broken into segments according to its song structure, which is actually a pretty straightforward approach. Songs typically have an intro, a verse, a chorus, a bridge, maybe an interlude towards the end, and an outro. Now for this interactive version of Material Girl, we get all of these song structure components implemented as segments in a horizontal resequencing system. They're all separate fragments that are activated with their own trigger points. Now as the level starts, we hear the intro segment, which only plays once. This transitions right into the verse and chorus, which is combined into one segment that's essentially the main loop. So let's take a look at that. After a while, we get to the bridge. It's implemented as a short loop that triggers right before Sackboy goes flying across a chasm. Now, once he lands, the music jumps right into the interlude section. So let's see how that part worked. Following the interlude, we go right back to that main loop for a while, and then we finally get to the outro segment, which winds things up at level completion. You can see how the music provides a sense of reward. As Sackboy progresses through the level, the music advances to reveal new content. A dynamic music system such as this one has the primary goal of indicating progress through the level. In the case of Material Girl, the advantage of song structure is that it provides well-defined segments that are inherently dissimilar. So jumping from one segment to the next feels very dramatic. We're meant to notice what's happening. It's actually part of the reward. Now, around the same time, the developer Sumo Digital was also asking me to compose horizontally resequenced music for the Spyder game. And that's actually a very different approach. Spyder is a pretty stealthy game. It's not about running and jumping. It's about being a secret agent. So the music had to be sneakier, and it had to leave space for players to think and to plan. For puzzle solving and exploration, the music I composed for Spyder is horizontally resequenced, but those segments are designed to ebb and to flow and even to settle into silence periodically. There are also a lot more segments involved. Every level of the game had over 30 music segments in order to enable divergent and unpredictable music during puzzle-solving gameplay. And the order of those segments is randomized so that players can't anticipate what they'll hear. Let's check out an example of this system in action. So you can see this interactive system in the Spyder game isn't really indicating progress through the level, the way the Material Girl music did. Instead, the focus of this system in the Spyder game is to create musical variety and to avoid predictability. A system like this can keep gaming music from coming across as repetitive. So the Sackboy and Spyder approaches are actually quite different. However, there are similarities here. Like the Material Girl example from Sackboy: A Big Adventure, this system in the Spyder game is taking an overtly segmented approach. We're aware that the music has different sections that transition into each other, and the dynamic music system structures itself around that awareness. But what if that isn't the goal? What if we want the horizontal resequencing system to completely hide its transitions? Now, to get a taste of how that approach would work, let's look at one of the original tracks I composed for Sackboy: A Big Adventure, Shooby-Doo Hullabaloo, the boss battle music at the end of the Thar She Blows Up level. Now, like Material Girl, this boss battle track is structured in horizontal segments. In this case, 3 progressively more dramatic chunks of music. But the implementation strives towards a seamless experience with the goal of hiding those transitions rather than showing them. So let's see how that worked. As you can see, pure horizontal resequencing can be a very flexible approach to injecting interactivity into our game music. We can aim to make our music feel seamless, or we can present our music in a more segmented, overt way, and both approaches can be effective. Interactive music design is highly contextual. The circumstances dictate our choices. No single method can be considered the best way or the right way. Working on these 2 projects at the same time, I came across this idea over and over again. For instance, unlike Spyder, Sackboy: A Big Adventure is the latest game in a franchise. And the previous games in this franchise implemented music using pure vertical layering. Now, when we compose our music so that our chosen instruments can be incorporated individually, and then those instruments can be divided up and manipulated separately during gameplay, that's vertical layering. This technique helps music to feel reactive without also having to be divided up into segments. Sackboy's previous games in the franchise had an elaborate system of pure vertical layering. For Sackboy: A Big Adventure, the music team favored other methods of dynamic music implementation. However, Spyder embraced pure vertical layering for its action sequences, so let's take a look at a couple of examples. Our intrepid super spy, Agent 8, goes on many dangerous missions, and one of them sends him scurrying through the innards of a massive computer. The music I composed for this sequence is a funky, late 60s style track with lots of vertical layers that get activated as Agent 8 moves from one area to another. There are no horizontal segments, so the vertical layers have to do all of the work to make the music feel dynamic. So let's see how that worked. In another dangerous mission, Agent 8 gets launched into outer space to rescue some imperiled astronauts. For this level, I composed an interactive 1970s space disco track with vertical layers that react fluidly during gameplay. Sometimes gamers only hear the rhythmic elements of the track, sometimes they only hear the synths, and sometimes they hear the whole mix. The vertical layers kick in to control how intense things feel during gameplay. So let's check that out. This vertical layering music from Spyder accomplished two goals. It indicated progress through the level, and it created variety to keep the music from feeling repetitive. So while horizontal resequencing slices up a track into segments to accomplish the same goals, a pure vertical layering approach can instill a sense of progression and variety without needing to fragment a composition. But what if we want to do that anyway? What if we want a hybrid, horizontal, vertical system with both segments and layers at the same time in the same track? Can we have the best of both worlds? Well, it turns out both Spyder and Sackboy: A Big Adventure answered that question with a resounding yes. However, each project addressed the issue differently, so let's start with Sackboy's approach. For the Sink or Swing level of Sackboy: A Big Adventure, I composed an original symphonic-style waltz. The 3/4 time emphasized the kinetics as Sackboy swung across the level. Now, as Sackboy progressed, the waltz of the bubbles used both horizontal segments and vertical layers for musical interactivity. The track was broken into 7 horizontal segments that progressed as Sackboy traversed the level. Now, periodically, the elements of the overall mix would change to either add or subtract a women's choir as a new music layer. This worked to inject some much-needed variety into the overall mix. So let's see what that was like. The vertical layering technique also inserted itself into the game mechanics by virtue of the iconic Sackboy success melody. Now, those of you who have played Sackboy: A Big Adventure will recognize the 6 notes in this game cinema.
Or maybe he was just guarding this odd-looking egg. Here, why don't you hang on to it?
The music team for Sackboy: A Big Adventure used this success melody across the game whenever Sackboy picks up a collectible known as a Dreamer Orb. We hear his success melody as a separate vertical layer that marries harmonically with whatever horizontal segment happens to be playing at the time. So let's take a look at that. You can see that the interactive music system here accomplishes 3 goals. Goal 1, the horizontal segments indicate the player's progress through the level. Goal 2, vertical layers create variety to keep the music feeling fresh over time. Goal 3, an additional vertical layer provides a reward when objectives are achieved. So we can see that horizontal and vertical techniques work well together. They worked for both Sackboy: A Big Adventure and for the Spyder game, which I was working on at the same time. The implementation for Spyder, though, is very different structurally. For example, during one of Spyder's more stealthy levels, Agent 8 infiltrates the enemy's high-security war room. While pursuing his mission to obtain some top-secret documents, Agent 8 accidentally turns on a desk radio, and my 60s-style lounge jazz music composition starts playing from it. This keeps playing throughout the rest of the mission. Diegetic music, like my lounge jazz composition from the War Room radio, is considered to exist inside the fictional narrative, whereas non-diegetic music, or dramatic underscore, is considered to be outside of it. So now that we have that continuous diegetic jazz music from the radio, does this mean that we can no longer have dramatic underscore? Well, not at all. We just have to apply some creative solutions. The audio team at Sumo Sheffield and I solved this problem with a hybrid dynamic music system that included both horizontal segments and vertical layers. Now, first, a vertical layer would start playing that continuous jazz music from the War Room radio, and then the dramatic underscore would come in on top, delivered in over 30 horizontal segments. Now, like the success melody from Sackboy, these music segments were structured to blend with the other music that was already playing. So every measure of the radio music would have a corresponding measure of dramatic underscore. These underscore segments would only play when they were triggered, so they'd usually play in different sequences. This helped the music to stay fresh as gameplay progressed. Let's check out what that was like. As we can see, this interactive music system from the Spyder War Room actually accomplishes many goals. The horizontal segments indicate progress through the level, they create musical variety, and they reward players when objectives are achieved. Plus, the vertical layers allow us to merge diegetic and non-diegetic music together. But there is another goal that dynamic implementation can address, and it's actually a much more practical consideration than any of the others. Dynamic music can stretch one piece of music so that it's doing the jobs typically done by several tracks. Dynamic systems can make one piece of music take the place of an ambient track, a puzzle-solving track, and a high-energy action track. It's actually a great way for development teams to optimize music coverage for their games. So let's see a couple of examples of this. Earlier, we checked out the Shooby-Doo Hullabaloo music from Sackboy: A Big Adventure. While we already looked at that big boss fight music from the end of the level, that same music also starts the level in a very low-keyed way. It's pretty understated and calm. And that same musical composition slowly builds in intensity by virtue of its horizontal segments. So by the time we get to the end of the level, it's gone from a peaceful ambient texture all the way to a rousing orchestral finale. Let's check out how that transformation occurred. In this excerpt from Sackboy: A Big Adventure, we saw how a dynamic music system enabled a single piece of music to scale between broadly divergent levels of dramatic intensity. But the Spyder video game takes this idea even further by employing one of the more interesting and unusual applications of dynamic implementation for its timed micro-mission challenges. So let's discuss how that system worked. Now, we all know that purely linear music has some distinct advantages. As we mentioned at the beginning of this talk, linear music has a set beginning, middle, and end. Linear music can more fully explore its ideas without having to worry about how the maze of a dynamic music system might impact an instrumental arrangement, or juggle the progression of musical content, or even truncate melodic lines. Now, while all these issues are solvable, linear music certainly provides an added breadth of creative freedom. So, is it possible to preserve these advantages while also employing dynamic implementation in our tracks? Well, let's see how the Spyder game tackled that challenge. When Agent 8 isn't off saving the world, he's back at headquarters, where he's evaluated, and he undertakes difficult training missions. These missions are timed sequences. They last exactly 3 minutes. Now, because of this, when composing music for these timed training missions, I was able to work in a hybrid music structure that combined both linear and dynamic elements. I composed a piece of linear music that lasted exactly 3 minutes, with a definitive beginning, middle, and end. And then I added vertical layers to this linear composition, so that allowed it to scale in intensity as the countdown sequence progressed. So let's take a look at how that worked. Notice how this hybrid linear dynamic structure adds layers when mission objectives are met. So now we've discussed 4 distinct forms of dynamic music implementation. We've reviewed the structural mechanics of both horizontal resequencing and vertical layering. And we've taken a look at how these very different interactive techniques can be merged into hybrid forms. We've also examined some of the goals of dynamic music implementation. By working with Sumo Digital on both Sackboy: A Big Adventure and Spyder at the same time, I had the chance to see how versatile dynamic music can be. As we discussed earlier, interactive music design is highly contextual. The circumstances dictate our choices. There is no best way or right way. By keeping an open mind and exploring our options, we have the opportunity to discover lots of divergent possibilities. It's one of the more inspiring aspects of our work as game composers. Thanks very much for watching.